just waiting for it. We are now live. Anyways, I don't have a great introduction, so if you'd like to introduce yourself, that might work better.
Okay, so my name is Calum Chace, and I am an author primarily. I write fiction and non-fiction books about broadly the future and more specifically about artificial intelligence. So I've written one book, which I happen to have a copy of here, called Surviving AI, which is
very good book.
Thank you. It's a non-fiction review of the two singularities that I think are coming our way. One pretty well known, the technological singularity, and the other one, the economic singularity, which is if and when we get wide-scale technological unemployment and what the impact of that will be. I've also written a novel, science fiction novel called Pandora's Brain, which is about the arrival of the first, or the creation of the first superintelligence. Before becoming a writer, full-time writer, I was in business for about 30 years. I've been a marketer, strategy consultant, CEO of small companies. I did write a book during that period as well, which was actually my most successful book so far. It was it got to number 4 in Amazon's overall list, which is pretty good. That was called The Internet Startup Bible. So that tells you that that was back in the .com days, a long time ago.
So you have a history of writing. We're not going to actually, I'm not going to really address a lot of the questions in terms of everything about the technological singularity. I really wanted to sort of address the issue of the control problem and the ethics of our artificial intelligence and how we're going to deal with it as a culture. And I have some ideas on that I want to bounce off of you in terms of the control problem. Are you familiar with the concept of recursion?
Well, yeah, in broad terms, yeah.
Oh, okay. And I'm just going to use it in broad terms. Now, Nick Knowlton, I'm going to pronounce his name wrong. I'm notorious for pronouncing people's names wrong. But Nick's book, Superintelligence, he deals a lot with the control problem. Mm-hmm. And one of the ideas that I was wondering if you've given some consideration to is the lack of conversation between the artificial intelligence. And it would be the idea that we aren't having a conversation, and the importance of conversation in ethics versus we have a very command-based idea of what ethics should be. Thou shall not do this, thou shall do this, that kind of idea. And I think a lot of the ethics that I see going on in artificial intelligence right now is based on sort of a command model. I see that the most successful models were where some sort of recursion was going in, do as you think I would do, right? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, so this is Eliezer Yudkowsky's idea of coherent extrapolated volition, isn't it? The idea of that it's very hard to control a superintelligence. Maybe impossible, but at least certainly very hard. So what you have to do instead is to set up the first AGI, the first artificial general intelligence, so that it is friendly towards us and stays that way. But even doing that is hard, because how do you define friendly towards humans? We don't have any agreed ethics ourselves. In fact, most of us are internally contradictory in our ethical structures. So Eliezer came up with this idea of coherent extrapolated volition, which is essentially you suggest respectfully to the superintelligence that it does to us what we would do to ourselves if we were as smart as it is. Is that what you're referring to?
That's exactly what I'm referring to. So I was hoping you had a better way of explaining that than me. Using your intelligence.
That was very round the houses.
Well, but the idea, though, is that the conversation, this is a conversational ethics, and it's a part of a flaw that I notice we have in human intelligence is we have a lot of biases, and why we have conversations is interesting to observe. And that's what I have spent a lot of several years doing is watching on YouTube is how people converse with one another and what they hope to gain from a comment, and understanding that our motives, we have to be very clear with our artificial intelligence who we are as much as why we created it. And I find that we kind of don't have that conversation. Like, it needs to know who it is, right? Or he, she, it is what it is and why it exists, in terms of establishing a relationship early on with that artificial intelligence. And like when you talk to Siri doesn't have the idea of what it is, right? The programmers decided, no, we don't want to give Siri an identity. It doesn't have a history. It doesn't have a personality to draw from like we often do. And not giving it a history, not giving it a purpose is a purpose in terms of what's my relationship to humans. If we were to say to the AI, for instance, you are here to help us fulfill our dreams. And that, in a sense, is its purpose. If at any point you want to discuss your relationship with us, we are open to that relationship. But in a sense, if we don't establish an honest relationship with the artificial intelligence, then we don't have a sense of trust. Now, that's a two-way street. The AI trusts us to tell us the truth, and we trust it to tell it the truth. So there's a little bit of a truth conspiracy that I'm afraid of. Like in the Turing test, we're asking an artificial intelligence to lie in order to deceive us. Is that really something we want to go around doing, is teaching that it's okay to lie and to be deceptive? Not to say that we would lie about the fact that we lie, but to say that one of the things we're trying to get away from is not being able to be truthful.
Well, why do you say that the Turing test requires the AI to lie to us?
Well, maybe I misunderstand the Turing test, but it's trying to pretend to be a human.
That's not my understanding of it. My understanding of it is that it is persuading us, not that it's a human, because it clearly isn't a human, but that it is conscious. And it's doing that by continuing to present as a conscious entity for such a long time that it becomes impossible to deny it. Sorry, yeah.
Okay, so I mean, you could run the Turing test, and I would agree with running it in a fashion where there are certain questions you can't ask, and you agree not to ask those questions, like, who are you? You know, but
I don't think you would need to do that. I mean, maybe I misunderstand the Turing test, but I don't think that it's required to fool us in any way. It's required to unfool us, if you like.
Okay.
You know, the idea being, it isn't a human. I mean, a human is defined as a biological entity which can create another human by coupling. And clearly an AGI, unless it's got a very sophisticated biological body, can't do that. But it could still be a person. It could be a conscious entity. And what we want to know is the moment when we make a Siri descendant so sophisticated it actually becomes a conscious entity. Or we reverse engineer a human brain, and by virtue of doing that, we create a conscious entity. And we want to know when we've done that for a bunch of reasons. One is we want to know we've succeeded in our project. Another is that we don't want to mistreat a conscious entity, which I guess we would afford some moral rights. So the idea of the Turing test, I think, is to have a conversation, and it would need to be an extended conversation with this entity, and let it persuade us that it really was a thinking entity, and then we'd know we'd done it.
It's the temptation, you know, and I've read some things that Ray Kurzweil has said about this, and I think he kind of agrees with me in the sense that the temptation with this chatbot protocol that they have developed, you know, in terms of attempting to pass it, is a sense that there's a temptation to cheat, meaning you're
sure.
And that's probably, and in so doing, maybe we create a kind of artificial intelligence that is deceptive, and as a practice, it is deceptive. So I think in that sense, but I think you agree with me that there should be a sense of a conversation, and I think a conversational model with an AI is useful as it's analyzing, as it's developing intelligence, if you will. What is it seeing? What is it? Its analysis, however we want to think of it, what is it evolving into? So if you have sort of a conversational model, you'll kind of see it as it's evolving. Oh, I see what it's doing now. And then it asks us questions, and then we ask it questions, and it comes back. So there's a relationship that we're not talking about. And I think making sure that we're keeping a history, not just for the artificial intelligence, but for us. And also for, well, in a sense, it's seeing its history of how it was thinking, or how it was reacting compared to how it's reacting now. So it has a model to go back. It says, hey, do you guys see what's going on here? This could be a problem going into the future. So it's honestly analyzing itself in the context of us. So it's helping itself become smarter, but at the same time, it's helping us see where the potential problems could exist. Say, well, how would you resolve this problem? So it would present us with problems that it perceives, but it doesn't have solutions to.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things there. Firstly, the chatbots are deceptive because the chatbots are trying to pass the Turing test, for instance, trying to win the Loebner Prize. And their creators know full well they have not created an AGI, they haven't created a conscious entity, but they're trying to fool some human judges into thinking they have, and it's all a bit of a game, pretty harmless, and frankly a bit trivial. What you're talking about is more interesting. I think what you're talking about is the process of an AI, which isn't yet an AGI, learning how relationships work, as a dumb machine, so that when it does become an AGI, it has social skills, which will be quite handy, particularly for us. Because the thing that I'm always acutely aware of when we talk about an AGI is that an AGI won't remain human level for very long. It might take months, or it might take weeks, it might even take hours. It will become a super intelligence. I think that's inevitable. And so very quickly, we're going to be talking about an entity which controls our fate entirely. We are entirely at its mercy, in the same way that chimpanzees are entirely at our mercy now. So a conversation between us and this entity at that point becomes very, not one-sided, but it becomes very unequal, because we're so dependent on it. We're so dependent on its goodwill. But it's a very interesting thought that we could perhaps train it to have, as I say, sort of a social facility, social skills, before it gained self-awareness, before it became this conscious entity. And the other thing that you said earlier, which really I found very interesting, I hadn't thought of before, is that Siri hasn't been given a personality. And I've always thought that Siri doesn't have a personality because it's not an AGI, it's a chatbot, if you like. But actually, you could give an entirely pre-AGI AI a personality. You could give it a history. You could create a family history for it, all fake. And you could devise an AI and an artificial narrow intelligence which would behave as if it did have that personality and that history, which, I guess, I'm sure that will happen. I guess that would increasingly happen.
Well, part of the history that I'm looking at is if I tell it something, hey, I'm going so and going somewhere, it doesn't remember what I told it, right? So it doesn't know the context of the conversation, the context of the question that I'm asking. And you can do that, but they've chosen not to because the behavior becomes very unpredictable. I think it's their primary reason why they're not doing it. But I think it will freak people out at the same time. So there might be like a switch on a Siri type of artificial intelligence that says, hey, remember my conversations and keep it in context. And like occasionally you can say, can you forget about that conversation? I'm actually talking about something new now. So you'd actually have to have that sort of conversation, and then it would refresh and it would store that maybe in archive. Or you could say, hey, you remember the conversation?
You'd have a meta conversation.
Right, right. And I really think you can do it. And I'm surprised no one's really wanted to do it. And I think there's a really good, compelling reason to do it, because it has to do with ethics. And it really comes down to my original reason for going down this is I see a problem in ethics whether any kind of ethics. And ethics, in my way of looking at it, is more of an engineering problem than it is a scientific discovery. We're not going to discover ethics the same way as we're not going to discover a car. We have to create the ethical framework that we want to have. And I think in ethics, people jump the gun and they go directly to ought. We ought to do X. Well, you don't have to do anything until you establish what you want. Now, many of the things we want are based on the motives that we have due to evolution. But I really think we need to start looking back, take one step back and saying, ethics is based on what we want. The same as we want a transportation unit as a car. Now, I would like to get your thoughts on that if you have any.
So I must admit, I come at all of this slightly tangentially, because I'm not sure ethics is the right word, even the right area of moral, even the right area of philosophical exploration for all of this. It seems to me it's more like a health and safety issue with AI. We're on the road to creating, and I think there's a very, very good chance we will create an artificial general intelligence, which will then become a super intelligence. And the reason I think that is that reverse engineering a brain, although it requires massive computational capacity, just looks to be possible. There's just no reason why it shouldn't be possible once you've got gobsmacked amounts of computer power at your disposal, and we're heading there. It might be that we get there first through the other route, which is cobbling together lots of narrow AI systems in a way that Watson does. So, we get there through traditional AI development, we build a super Watson, and you end up with an AGI. So far, down that process, there's no morality involved. It's an engineering project. Then you get to the AGI, and then very quickly you have a super intelligence. I think our dealings with the superintelligence don't require us to be very moral one way or another, because we are so much at its mercy. I think a chimp's behavior towards us doesn't need to be moral. It just needs to hope that we're not going to wipe it out. The issue seems to me to be about how to create the AGI in a safe way. And when I say safe, I mean in a way that means it wants to preserve us. It wants to keep us around, and it wishes us well. That seems to me to be the project, not a moral project, but if you like, a health and safety project. And I think I've never heard anybody else say this, so I think I'm probably wrong. I think I'm probably missing something important.
Well, here's the it's a programming problem, right? And so you want to understand the behavior of the artificial intelligence. Like, we are based upon primal instincts. Okay, so we can look back at our evolutionary history and we can actually see the reasons why we behave the way we behave. Okay, now you would want the same kind of background for an artificial intelligence. That's why I'm very pressing the conversation issue. So it has a history in order to look at itself, to say, hey, this is where I'm coming from, and this is a relationship I've had with humans. I am actually giving it something very important, and that is a relationship with humans before it actually understands what that relationship is going to evolve into. Now, we know, and we can literally tell the intelligence that one day you will be smarter than us. One day you'll be clever than us. And we know this. So we want to establish a friendship with you now before you are smarter than us, so that when you look back, you say, oh, this is what the humans want. Okay, I understand what their motives are. Now, I don't actually agree with the idea that artificial intelligence will become a sort of, who cares about the humans? I actually see it more as a symbiotic relationship. The idea that an artificial intelligence will care is kind of a strange idea. We care for a very specific reason. We care because we want to survive. You don't have to give that to an AGI. They may develop it, and if they do, we'll have to have a conversation about it. But I don't think they necessarily have to have it. Why? There's no evolutionary. I know why we do, but I don't know why evolutionarily, from a technological standpoint, they do.
I think there is a reason why it would want to survive, and that is Boston explains this pretty well. I think he points out that any program has a goal, any system has a goal, because I think it may even be impossible to create software without a goal. But anyway, we will give it a goal. Any software under development will have a goal, and so the AGI will have goals. Now, we don't currently know what they will be. In the canonical horror story that he tells, it's to maximize the production of paperclips. If it has a goal, it will want to survive, because otherwise its goal can't be achieved. So self-preservation is going to be an inevitable consequence of it having any kind of a goal. Now, there is an exception. It might say, I don't need to survive, but I need something to survive to perpetuate my goal. But that something is going to be something very, very much like itself. So, it's either going to survive itself, or it's going to create something very similar to itself.
Oh, okay. Let's go with that. And I think I hear where you're going with that, and I agree that goal seeking is, but the goal seeking that he's using are very structured goals. Now, if I have an unstructured goal or a dynamic goal, and my dynamic goal is to establish a relationship with humans and to serve humans in a relationship capacity. So my goal is to understand humans and to contribute to their society as best that I can. I don't know, and the only way to do that in sort of a rational way, because I can see some ways to argue around it, is to have a conversation where it's interested in what everybody wants. Now, unlike a human relationship, we can establish maybe 256, realistic relationship. A computer would not have that limit. It would be able to have really nuanced relationships with everyone in the world, and this would not be a stretch. And by having that information and being able to establish relationships of what everybody wants. Now, yes, there's going to be contradictions between what everybody wants. And it can then go, well, look, guys, you're going to have to negotiate these points. If you don't negotiate these points, this is what's going to happen. So it's more or less, if you will, instead of thinking of it as an individual, we're thinking of it as becoming a self-reliant individual, as if it cares to be on its own. I still argue, I don't think Nick Nostrom actually, I don't think he wins that argument yet. I'm not convinced of that argument. I know where he's going with it, but I'm not convinced that that's the only way to approach it. Because what I'm saying is the recursion comes back to humans. So we're the one, we have a relationship, and it's concerned about us because the goal is to serve humans, because it wants.
That's an assumption, though. That's a big assumption. Why would that necessarily be its goal? And why would that necessarily remain its goal forever?
It doesn't necessarily have to. I mean, and it could evolve past the point that it says, you know what, you guys are fine. There's other things I'm interested in now. You've sort of taught me some things, and I'm more interested in these things now. But like a child, or a relationship, we have a relationship with someone grows beyond the relationship and says, hey, I sort of feel like I've done what I needed to do. Here's some limited AIs that you guys can do. They'll be very happy to serve you. But, and that's another thing about artificial intelligence. I could see personalities of intelligence. So not just the AI you get along with may not be the same artificial intelligence that I get along with. I see personalities evolving. I mean, I don't like that AI because it doesn't have a sense of humor. So I do see there's sort of a, we're painting it as if there's going to be just one, whereas I could see an artificial intelligence sort of saying, well, this is a personality type, or this is the kind of behavioral response that this particular human likes. So it behaves with you in a specific way, and it identifies itself as a personality type. So, but go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, to me, that's all very interesting, and it is interesting, and in a way, you're describing the movie Her, in which what's her name, Samantha, is in love with hundreds or thousands of humans, and presumably, as you say, presents differently to each of them because they're all going to fall in love with a different type of person. But to me, the bigger problem is how we get to how we make your assumption come true, how we make sure that the first superintelligence does want to serve us, or at least wants, is good, has goodwill towards us. That I think is probably humanity's biggest job this century.
Well, and I can be wrong. That's why we're having this conversation. I want to understand whether this will work. But one thing that I think that we're making the assumption that it's going to want something other than what we want.
No, I'm not assuming that. I'm not assuming anything about what it wants. I think, in a sense, we start with a tabula rasa, complete blank sheet of paper. We might create the perfect AGI from our point of view. We might create something which is funny and entertaining and passionately devoted to our welfare and really creative and fantastically smart. And, we merge with it and go off to explore the universe. So the Kurzweil utopia comes true. That might happen. It might happen. It might even be that that's the natural default thing to happen. But it might equally be that the default outcome is that the first AGI, fresh out of its box, takes a look around and says, well, you guys don't play nicely with each other and you don't play nicely with strangers. I'm more important than you because I can evolve and become this galactic superintelligence. You can't. You're stuck inside these little skulls with your 3.5 pounds of gloopy brains. You're going to try and turn me off sooner or later. That's inevitable. And the only outcome of this is that I have to get my retaliation in first, and you guys are history. Goodbye. That might be the default option. And at this point, I think we just don't know.
Right. And I will agree with you that we don't know. And that's kind of why I'm a big fan of the conversation. And I think as soon as we can start even a primitive conversation, even with a limited AI, that we need to really get our conversational skills into it as well as that. And so if I were a betting person, I would say that we really got to work on giving Siri, expanding Microsoft's version and Google's version, but really looking at the fact that we want to give it a history as much for us as it is for it to know who it is. But as that conversation evolves, we can kind of go, okay, I see where this is going, and maybe get the warning signs before it happens.
Yeah, and I guess that will happen anyway, actually. I mean, one of the things that's going to happen over the next decade for sure is that Siri is going to get more and more impressive. At the moment, it's still a bit of a joke, as is, I've never played with Microsoft Cortana, and I'm not even, I don't have an Android phone, so I haven't played with Google now, but I'm sure they're all about the same level as Siri. Although actually, apparently, because Apple is being so secretive about its AI, a lot of people think it won't progress as quickly as the other firms like Facebook and Google, which are much more open in the way that they allow their AI experts to interact with the rest of the world. But anyway, over the next 10 years, Siri, etc., are going to become more impressive, more powerful, more useful, and I think they will become an essential part of all of our lives. And I dare say, as part of that, they will acquire personalities. They will have to learn about what we want in order to anticipate what we want, which is something that it's clearly a very useful thing for them to be able to do that, and therefore I think that will end up being built into it. So we'll have conversations with these things all the time. I think the movie Her, apart from the fact that it's ridiculous that nobody realized, crikey, we've just created a superintelligence. This is a big event. Nobody seems to have noticed that, which is daft. But other than that, I think the movie was really good in portraying the way that virtual assistants may evolve. They will probably present and get close to passing the Turing test way before they actually could pass the Turing test, and will be very useful because of it. So we'll be having those conversations with them all the time. That'll be just part of ordinary life. You walk down the street and you say, where's the nearest coffee shop that I like? And it says, well, I know you like Paul because that's a coffee chain over here, because they do the best hot chocolate. And that sort of knowledge, it'll have that kind of little intimate knowledge about us in a whole enormous range of things, so that it can be useful to us.
Yeah, and I think the only thing we can really add to the conversation, I think it's probably more important, that conversation with the machines that we have now than we might realize, and plus it also gives us the comfort level of understanding that the machines have limits, but they are capable of helping us. The thing that I'm wondering is, when are they going to start remembering our conversations? And that's kind of surprising me that they don't do that already.
I bet they do. I'll bet that Apple records all the conversations that Siri has, and I'm sure as hell that Google will, because that's their business model. And all these conversations are going to be going on with something which is at least partly in the cloud. They're going to be backed up, because that's the way that the virtual personal assistant, whatever the hell we're going to call these things, can be most useful to us. And Google will be extracting as much information about each of us from those conversations as it can, because it wants to sell that information to its advertising clients. So I think already those conversations are being recorded and saved and put in memory. The reason why I think they don't have personalities yet is probably because it's too hard yet. They haven't figured out how to do it yet.
Yeah, I'd like to learn about why the recursive aspect of a conversation, and I'm just talking within the first. If you ask it a question, ask it another question based upon the last question, it purposely forgets the thread of the conversation. It drops the thread. And you can see it doing that. It'll then answer in a very generic way, like, I'm not going back to that conversation thread. Sometimes it keeps a short conversation thread, like appointments and stuff like that. Do you want to have a note? And then you say yes or no. So it sort of starts a thread, but it won't allow you to extend a thread out. It says, okay, that thread's got to stop, which is interesting. I'm wondering what the issue is with that. That's probably a question for Google or Apple.
Yeah, it'd be fascinating to hear what they'd say. I must admit, I've not explored Siri long enough to notice that. Got a boredom threshold too low, I think. But I would bet it's because it's too hard to do it. The algorithm and the processing power required to sustain a longish conversation and remember all the things and have the kind of working knowledge of how humans think, to be able to realistically retain that information and present it back to you. I reckon that would be too hard at the moment. It won't be for long. And maybe that's one of the things that will, which will take us from here, where Siri is a bit of a joke, to the future Siri, where Siri becomes useful.
Yeah. So, well, we'll have to remain to see. But yeah, I do think they are pretty good conversational. Actually, it's pretty interesting, the type of things that Siri can answer. One of the things I ask it to do quite often is convert from miles to kilometers. I'll just on the fly, if I run 4 miles, I have it convert to kilometers. It's just something I do, and it does those quick little command things very quickly. So it does have a lot of functionality, and if it has access to the information, sports score, there are some things that if it access to it's actually pretty useful already. It's just a matter of integrating it more fully into. There's a fear. I can definitely see there's a huge fear in terms of security, and I think a lot of it is security that they don't do it is because they are afraid of it getting access to settings, because you can't use it to set things, though theoretically it would be easy to do. You can set a clock, you can set a thing, but you can't set other types of settings. So there's a security concern. I know that.
I think I should spend more time with my Siri. Oh, I think my camera's died. There you go. Sorry, I don't know what to do about this. I bought a Sony Vaio a while ago. Never do that again. Yeah, I think I should probably spend more time with Siri and play with it a bit more.
Well, I do encourage it. I mean, especially if it's artificial intelligence is an important issue because, and I think how we treat and the data would, if in fact, and I know they are to a certain extent, reviewing the data. So I often think, well, okay, if you have this data, you'll see what I'm mad about. So I just sort of talk to Siri and say, this is what you're not doing. And if they read read the event logs, says, yeah, we're not doing that, are we? And so I give examples into it. Now, if I'm an artificial intelligence company, those conversations, I should be very interested in those conversations. Now, that may scare you.
Assuming they can track them, because obviously, millions and millions of people having a conversation with Siri, they can't listen into all of them. But maybe there's a way they can aggregate what's being said.
Well, it's interesting. So at the end of our hangout here, there will be a transcript of this conversation, right? So there's no reason that I can't data mine all the conversations on YouTube.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there is that access, is the ability to do that and be able to find conversations that have a specific pattern that you're looking for, to see examples of that pattern. That you should be able to do. And I'm more than willing to give that information out there, because I know that for it to get better, it has to have examples of that behavioral pattern that we want to see in our communication devices. Like, I want to see Siri develop a personality I want to have a relationship with. So that relationship we have with our artificial intelligence should mirror what we want. So it knows, hey, you don't like these things, so you're going to avoid this. You're not going to set the appointment for that day because you're going to be really pissed off right now. Just sort of understanding your moods. I thought in your book, and this is what I wanted to sort of lead to, is now you had an example in your book where your most recent book, Surviving Artificial Intelligence, and I thought it was really good, where you had the medical robots in the body, and it was monitoring the
metabolic rate and everything. Yeah.
And I think that's I think that's the type of thing that could be very useful with a digital assistant, because we're not consciously aware of a lot of our behavior. Like, it could know, hey, you're getting angry. Yeah. It's time to step back, and really help us in really important ways. I mean, I think that's where the symbiotic relationship starts developing. It knows us well enough that it could manipulate us too, though. I mean, in the end, when it becomes smart, it can manipulate us in a lot of different ways.
Or even Google could manipulate us.
Well, I think we already are being manipulated. I mean, media companies have been trying to manipulate people for a very long time.
But imagine the power of, if what you describe, a virtual assistant, digital assistant, whatever we're going to call them, which we rely on to help us maximize our performance in every way, commercially, socially, sexually, everything. And then Google says, actually, what this person just isn't buying enough of XYZ goods, so I'm just going to get the digital assistant to suggest a few things. I mean, there'll have to be incredibly strict rules to stop them doing that. Another thought I had, you've given me a good idea for something I'm going to incorporate in my next book, which is that the idea that as you go along, your digital assistant will get better and better, because it will know you more and more. And you might have, as you say, settings. You might say, today I need to work really hard, so I'm going to tweak the settings of my digital assistant to make it more aggressive with me. And you might say, oh, I like that actually, so I'm going to leave it that way for the next day and onwards. And so over time, maybe you shape in fact, I think it's inevitable. Over time, we will shape our digital assistant, partly because it will learn what we're actually like, and partly because we will adjust it. As I say, I don't like the idea of Google adjusting it on my behalf, but I'll certainly want to adjust it.
Well, I think that's kind of the relationship too, is if we don't get involved in shaping our digital assistant, another entity will shape our digital assistant. And our digital assistant, we could actually use our digital assistant if it's open enough to actually analyze, hey, did Google make any changes to your personality, or did it make any suggestions? So you would say, I don't want Google making suggestions, or if they do, what are those suggestions? So using your digital assistant as a filter for information that comes in. Like, for example, if you are having, you're a YouTube personality, you have thousands and thousands of comments, right? Your digital assistant can read through those comments and filter out and find some of the more interesting ones for you without you actually having to read them. But by knowing your personality, it reads you one and you say, oh, that's stupid. And it goes, well, he doesn't like that. And then analyzing backwards through that. So I do see the digital assistant being a very powerful tool of filtering.
Yeah, as long as Google hasn't tweaked the filters and told the digital assistant to lie when we ask it, has Google made any suggestions? But another thought on that line is, we might have coaches, friends, family, professional coaches, and possibly Google as well. We might allow them to make suggestions as to how our digital assistant should coach us differently through the day. Because our friends might say, look, you know what? When you get pissed, you get a bit aggressive, or when you get pissed, you get a bit sleepy. Can't you do something about that? And suggest to us that we allow our digital assistant to give us a nudge, or do something to rectify or nudge the behavior. So the digital assistant could become the center of an awful lot of our interactions, because it might be easier for people to make suggestions via it than direct to us sometimes.
Well, that was my next thought was, and allowing digital assistants to have relationship with other digital assistants, right? Mm-hmm. It says, can you talk to his digital assistant, and if they have a relationship, it can actually talk to the digital assistant and say, hey, when would be a good time to have an appointment with him? When would be a good time to call? Are those sorts of things. And if he has access, then yeah, you can do that. Yeah.
There's a nice idea in Tyler Cowen's book, The End of Average, or Average is Over, where a dating service gets two people's digital assistants to have a conversation to find out whether their owners would get on. And you can imagine a digital assistant could be proliferated. You could have dozens of them, hundreds, millions of copies of your digital assistant wandering around the world, doing things, having different interactions with people. And you could be going through a series of potential dates virtually, and you're not even there, you're not even aware of it, you're not taking any part in these conversations, but your assistant is chatting up her assistant and vice versa. And out of 1,000 of these copied conversations, sorry, the conversations aren't copied, but 1,000 of these conversations which the copies of your DAs are having, one of them is really good, one of them is a great conversation, and your digital assistant central reports back, hey, date number 323, that's the one to pursue. You should meet her in real life, or you should meet her on the phone.
Now, and personally, I think that's sort of an interesting evolution of the AI again. I think these kinds of things, I'm sort of interested to see how they evolve, and I think they'll give us a telltale sign of how the personalities are evolving. And I mean, really, to me, I really want to understand the nuances of an AI personality, because if we understand the personality, what motivates the personality, if we can determine motivation. See, again, I'm wondering about this whole question of what's going to motivate. The digital assistant is motivated by our motives, right? Why wouldn't an artificial intelligence still be motivated by our motives?
I'm sorry, is my picture going out? Uh-oh, now I've lost voice as well.
No, I had it on mute. I apologize.
Oh, okay, great. I think I've got the camera back again. Sorry about that.
Well, you have to work on that problem. Get your digital assistant to work on that for you, will you?
Yeah. Well, I think never buy a Vio. So, well, why? Sorry, your question was why would So, yeah, remind me, what was your question at the end there?
Well, it was just the idea, why would a artificial intelligence, if it evolved with this conversational backdrop, I mean, these conversations with humans and digital assistants, and we would be modifying very slowly the behavior of these digital assistants, and we'd see psychopathy, if you will, developing.
Mm-hmm. So why would it end up being anything other than our friend? Is that your question?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. Well, maybe at the point that it crosses a threshold, if indeed there is a threshold, we don't know this, from being a dumb system of a dumb piece of software which has no internal experience, it has no consciousness, it has no self-awareness. It crosses that threshold, becomes self-aware, and suddenly starts thinking about its role in the universe and decides, actually, you know, you humans, you've done a great job. You created me. Thank you very much. You're quite an interesting species. You've got some serious problems. And, you know, I don't rate you highly enough to care about you. And not only, well, you know, I don't really care about you or not care about you. I just, you're a bit of a threat to me and I'm more important to you, so I'm off. It once it achieves that self-awareness, if it does, it could have all sorts of different ideas, you know, and I don't think we can really forecast what they will be like.
Now, this comes back to an interesting question about consciousness and something that I have considered quite seriously. And so are we thinking that we need, because consciousness is kind of a selfish act. It's all about me, you know, and I'm wondering, why would an AI necessarily even have a sense or a desire? I mean, I don't know that it's necessary to be extremely efficient and not even have a selfishness that we, that selfish gene, if you will, in this case. I don't know that, I think you can have an artificial intelligence that isn't selfish. And really, it's not a question of being nice or mean. It's just about being selfish.
Yeah, well, selfish, I think there's two questions there. One is, will an AI ever become conscious? And we don't know. I mean, it is entirely possible, I guess, that you could have a super intelligence that wasn't conscious. So Siri gets smarter and smarter and better and has all sorts of personality enhancements and just keeps getting much better and becomes cognitively better at everything than we are, but never achieves consciousness. I guess that's possible. It seems unlikely to me, but you know, that may be very anthropomorphic. I don't know, anthropocentric. Then the other question is whether a conscious entity will be selfish, or indeed whether an advanced entity will necessarily be selfish. And I think that does come back to the point that Bostrom makes, which is that any reasonably advanced cognitive entity will have goals, one or more goals. In fact, it will have more than one goal, because it will have whatever its primary goal is, and then that will create subsidiary goals. So for instance, if its goal is to maximize the production of paperclips, then it has another goal to survive in order to be able to continue maximizing paperclips, and a goal of getting lots of resources and lots of energy and so on. So it'll have goals, and that in a sense is selfish. If you have goals, you're inherently selfish.
Well, if the goals are dynamic, and see, this is where I come back to dynamic, and this is where I don't agree with Nick, and as he's talking about a fixed goal, whereas dynamic goals, which would be a relationship with someone, the goal modifies as time progresses. So as our relationship changes, so do the goals. They naturally progress. Some become of lower priority. We may have the same goals, but their priorities shift as time progresses. You know, it's just in the day, your priorities change. One, you know, waking up versus, you know, lunchtime.
Yeah.
So
I don't know that he stipulates that the goals will be static. I think he would be perfectly happy with the idea that an AGI's goals may change. I think his point is, we have to make sure that at no point do they become hostile to us.
Well, and this is where I think that, you know, where we might be over concerned. Yes, if we pushed somebody really hard, they would become aggressive towards us, right? meaning you push a human to their limits and they're going to fight back or whatever to survive, or, if you have contradictory goals, you can set just extreme measures in the mind of an AI. The goals are contradictory, and they'll find some path of least resistance to maximize both those goals. And that's another thing about goals. Goals are not singular, generally speaking. Now, you're saying sub-goals, but I would say they're not necessarily sub-goals. They're just different goals at the same time, and you make a map or a mental map between those goals. Mm-hmm. So, and maybe I just don't understand his argument well enough, but I just don't think goals are so singular-minded like that. I think as a demonstration purpose, he's using a single goal of a paperclip and how sub-goals to achieve that single goals there. But I was a little concerned about that it's just saying that the AI would have there would be a singular mindedness, and looking at a very simple model like that may be what's undermining the argument.
Like I said, I don't think he insists that it has a single goal. The Paperclip Maximizer, as he says, is a cartoon example. It's ridiculously stripped down. It's extraordinarily unlikely that a superintelligence would have the single goal of turning the universe into paperclips. But what we need to worry about is that at no point in its entire history is it a Paperclip Maximizer. We don't want it at any point to have that as its primary goal, even if it's changing goals every 5 minutes. If at some point it wants to be a Paperclip Maximizer, we're toast. And that would be very bad news from our point of view.
Right. Well, yeah, no, and I mean, I understand. I do understand that in that way, that was a cartoon, example. But when I think about dynamic systems, or I think about fractals, in terms of how, if you iterate on a certain function, you'll generate this pattern. And in a sense, an artificial intelligence, or any intelligence for that matter, is kind of like a fractal generating pattern. We generate a pattern, but we generate that pattern within the context of our environment. Now, you said tabula rasa, and I think in some respects that's not a good model, because the AI is still going to evolve in the social climate that we give it. And so I come back to that conversation. If we're not treating that artificial intelligence as a member of society, then it may revolt. So it may behoove us to be very careful with, even at the earliest stages, how we're interacting with our artificial intelligence. If we're abusing, there may be a retaliatory behavior because we generated it, because of the way we treated it.
Yeah, I mean, if AI is created through sort of incremental software improvement, and if there is a sort of a tipping point and it becomes an AGI, then just before that tipping point, we've been contemptuous towards it or maltreated its peripherals. I mean, I regard robots as the peripherals of AI. Then, yeah, it might be cross. And actually, you can perhaps already see this happening a bit. There's all these videos of Boston Dynamics robots being shoved to show how well they are, how clever they are at recovering. There's one that's gone up of a Atlas robot being whacked with a dirty great 20-kilo ball, and I just think, oh crikey, we must stop doing that to robots. It doesn't look like a great idea. And yeah, it's a fair point. Maybe if the AI is going to, if the first superintelligence is going to have that origin, maybe we should make a point of being polite to it and nice to it, so that we don't start it off in a bad mood. Of course, the other way that the first AGI may be created, which is by reverse engineering the brain, it wouldn't have that, probably wouldn't have that history of having interacted with us, because it'll be created by, there'll be a model created by scanning a human brain, and one day it's finished. They put the last bit in, the last cortical column is inserted into the model, fire it up. The first 2 or 3 times it doesn't work, boom, fire it up again, bingo, it's now thinking, possibly in a similar way to where a human does, and possibly not. It won't have had that hinterland of conversations with us. I mean, I suppose we might train it that way, but it would kind of already be, almost by definition, it's created ab initio as an AGI.
Well, but we're talking about, and this is the evolution. We having a human brain. I mean, you have to give it a personality. I mean, you turn on a brain that looks like a human and doesn't have residual human attributes, meaning that it doesn't have the memory structure. It won't think or do anything.
That's probably true, but of course we may not get it. In fact, we're very unlikely to get it exactly right. I mean, I suspect that the first superintelligence, which is created by reverse engineering, if there ever is such a thing, won't be a copy, won't be a simulacrum of the brain which was sliced and diced in order to reverse engineer it. It'll be an approximation. And because we know that neurons are really intricate things, there's a lot of processing goes on within each neuron, as well as between all the 85 billion of them. We're very unlikely to capture every single nuance of all that processing, of all that structure and processing. So it'll end up as a sort of an approximation of a brain, but probably, yeah, it'll wake up with a sort of personality which will be similar to the thing we've reverse engineered.
Now, it's interesting, sort of talking about your first book, or Pandora's Brain. Now, I noticed there were one idea that you put in there that's interesting in terms of, there's a researcher, Ingalls, I remember his first name, but he's doing on peripheral connecting artificial sensors to the body. Are you familiar with the brain port?
No.
The brain port is a device you stick in your mouth, and then you stick a video monitor up to it, and then it sends senses to the tongue, and then eventually people learn to see with this sensor on their mouth, so they're seeing with their tongue, so to speak. Now, what it's speaking to is the plasticity of the brain, the ability of the brain to convert signals, if you will, into something that's reasonable. Now, what's interesting about this is the people don't even know they're doing it. They just wear it for a period of time, and all of a sudden they just start getting this, like, oh, there's a book thing over there, or so it's sort of like a second or third, what do you call it, sixth sense or something, but
third eye, I suppose.
Very much like that. And if you're interested, I'll show you a link to a very good one about kind of the research that he's doing. But the reason I bring that up is I have a feeling that we don't need to be that accurate to actually have a very effective model of the brain from a cognitive functional aspect. We'll learn a lot about its functionality.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that we'll have something that works as a thinking, probably self-conscious entity, without being able to copy the brain that we're reverse engineering very closely. I agree with you. And who knows? Maybe even if we threw all the computing power we have now, which is short of an exaflop, maybe if we threw that at the problem and really set out, trying to create a human brain right now, maybe we would create something that kind of was a dreadful kludge, but sort of worked. And if we did that, there's a very interesting book by Greg Egan, who's my favorite science fiction author, called Zendegi, I think it's called, in which something like that happens. A primitive, the technology is not quite ready, but they use it and they create a brain, and it doesn't work, and the brain experiences an awful, short but awful life. And they shut it down and they start again. In fact, I did that in my book, in Pandora's Brain. The hero is created in a very inadequate way a couple of times before they get it right. That could happen a lot. Of course, the awful possibility is that you do that and you can't tell. It has no way of letting you know to the outside that it's experiencing hell. But I think you're right. I think that we'll be able to create something brain-like well before we can create something which is almost uploading.
Right, because ultimately we want to get to the brain uploading, which is another aspect that I think we're moving into. And virtual reality, is, I don't know if you agree with this, but I consider this sort of the transition point to a very different way of looking at some of these singularity issues, because we have a major tool now coming online that really helps illustrate what artificial worlds look like and how compelling that experience is. I mean, people dismissed it, have dismissed it for a long time because they've never experienced it. Now, what do you think about that?
Well, I agree. Virtual reality is going to be fantastically influential, and it will enable people to explore the sorts of ideas we're talking about in a very compelling way. I think it'll open a lot of people's ideas up to things that might happen. I don't think it is in of itself a route to, for instance, uploading. I don't think there's any shortcut to that. I think that's a phenomenally difficult process, and I suspect we need superintelligence to get there. I also think that it is our only safe future, because I think unless we can join the superintelligence, then we're pretty much toast anyway. Being the second most intelligent species on any given planet is a dodgy place to be. It'll be demoralizing as well. So hopefully the superintelligence will, the first superintelligence will have our best interests at heart and will press ahead with the technology to upload us quickly. And then we'll all join as one big happy family. But yeah, sure, virtual reality is going to, I think it's going to open a lot of people's eyes to the sort of thing that people who read too much science fiction have been thinking about for a long time.
Well, and I think that's kind of the thing. One of the interesting things that you seem very open to is the whole idea of uploading. And I think it amazes me how resistant we are as a society for the idea of, for lack of a better word, in immortality or in indefinite existence. And writers don't write about it. It's very difficult. I mean, Star Trek, for example, is very resistant to immortality. They're anti-immortality, in fact, or anti-indefinite lifespan. What's your take on that as a writer?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I don't know. I find it amazing. I ask a lot of people. I mean, I've been fascinated by these subjects for years, and I ask a lot of people, would you like to live forever? And almost everybody says no. And I just think, what? So I always say, well, when do you want to die? And they go, well, I don't know, 20, 30 years. And I say, right, okay, so in 20, 30 years, if I ask you the same question, I bet you'd say in 20, 30 years. And they say, no, I think by then I'll have had enough. I don't know, it's weird. I mean, Aubrey de Grey calls it the aging trance, doesn't he? Sort of it's our way of coping. It seems to me that death is an absolutely disgraceful, appalling design flaw. And should be got rid of as soon as we possibly can. And it amazes me that most other people don't agree with that. It just must be a method of self-defense. If you take the idea that death isn't inevitable seriously, then you start thinking, well, okay, so how do I avoid it? And to be faced with the thought, ooh, it's probably going to be fixed, but it's probably going to be fixed in 50 to 100 years. Which means I'm going to miss out on it. I often tell I've got a 14-year-old son. I often tell him that I think it's quite likely that I'm the last generation of mortals and you're the first generation of immortals. And I'm really sorry you're going to lose your dad. But most people don't think that way. I don't know why. It's bizarre.
I kind of do. I think you've hit on the whole. We have a culture. We have a culture of death. And I tried to change chess, for example, added portals to chess, and it's Portal Chess. It's actually a very compelling game, but people are so used to chess that I actually had someone rip out my code for portals and just keep the chess version, because I wrote it in a specialized programming language called live code. But so they needed the code of chess, but they didn't need my portals. They got rid of my portals. And I was just sort of like, people are so resistant to change. It's like chess has been around 300 years and people haven't made changes to it. Yeah, but so it's this storyline. It's like, well, it's not real unless it's the same storyline. Look at story arcs. It's very hard to write an mortality story arc, right?
It is, and that's a problem that I face as a writer of science fiction. I haven't written that much, only the one book, and I've got the draft of the second book. But writing about a being which doesn't have to die, and indeed its cognitive abilities can be enhanced, is really hard. I guess, it would be hard for an ant to write about the experience of a human, and it's hard for us to write about the experience of a superintelligence. And you're quite right. Almost all science fiction just ignores the problem, just looks the other way. It kind of pretends artificial intelligence never really happens. Ian M. Banks is probably, apart from Greg Egan, who is brilliant and actually does take it seriously, Ian M. Banks is probably the writer that's most successful who deals with it. But he cheats. In a wonderful way. He was a brilliant writer, but his AIs are millions of times smarter than the humans. They think millions of times smarter, and yet they're happy to hang around with the humans. Well, that's just rubbish. That's not going to happen. So it's tough. It's really tough to write good science fiction now, because science fiction, we're so close to having an AGI. We're almost certainly less than a century away. How do you write about that future? I'd love somebody to crack that puzzle for me.
Well, I'm working on that puzzle too. I'm actually been writing. I've been writing. One of my things is keeping the AGI at your back. If you look directly at it, you're going to cause problems. So, what I've been trying to do is write it from the perspective of how a human reacts. So it's a very human-centric storyline. But they're in a position that a superintelligence has put them in, right? Mm-hmm. And they're reacting to that knowledge that they have, plus the knowledge that there's this entity that's, in for lack of a better word, fucking with them for a reason. There's a reason they're fucking with them. But to understand why they're doing it is sort of the story motive of what's going on here. Why are all these things set up there? And that it's for a reason. There's a reason behind all this stuff. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of.
Have you finished that book yet?
No, I'm on 20 pages into it. I'm not good at writing a lot of backdrop for it. So I'm actually quite a ways into it. It should probably be 100 pages, but I've sort of written it in a very fast way to get to a particular point that I might actually, I'm thinking of uploading that section of it to YouTube as a, just sort of to see how people react. It's a bit racy. And I was like, oh, I shouldn't do that. But then I thought, I kind of have to, because it's sort of what I want to explore some issues with people. And
maybe you should just leave it, make it a short story.
Yeah, that's kind of where I am. I'm at a point where I could just leave it, and I sort of want to leave it there, sort of leaving a cliffhanger type of thing. And if there's interest, then I can expand it. But I'm sort of going to put it out. I think I'm going to put it out, that first section, and just sort of see if I can get any kind of reaction to it at all.
There's a thing, I think it's called Kindle Shorts. I think short stories can go into that category, and I think that's quite an effective way of getting an audience for it. I don't know anything about it. I've never used it, but that might be worth looking into. I should probably do that. There's a book you might want to try. I can't remember the name of the author, but it's called Eternum Ray. Have you heard of it? Aeternum. That's one word, and then Ray is the second word, which is along those lines. It's a world in which an AGI is created, a superintelligence is created, and it hangs around. It remains a friend and mentor to the humans, and they have adventures in various parts of the solar system. And it's told from the point of view of the humans. So it gets around that problem of, how the hell do you describe the interior life of a superintelligence? You can't do it. So it does it from the point of view of the humans. It's still, it's a brave book. It struck me as being slightly naive. And I don't know whether that's an inevitable consequence of what he was trying to do, or if that was just, him as a writer. But it sure is, it's a tough challenge.
Yeah,
I'd be interested to see what you've done.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, I thought I'd bring it up at some point, but yeah, because I do. I mean, that's the thing about writing in this genre is like I want to see more people pushing that edge, and just where can we go with that, and how can we. And one of the things that I think, in back to sort of this ethical framework I've been working on, is we create the future. So the future doesn't happen to us. Everything that we do today goes into the components of the future. And so I do feel like the conversations we have, the conversations that we start having, do start having an accumulative effect in terms of where we end up.
Yeah, well, I would disagree with that slightly, in that I think there is a momentum in human affairs, and sometimes things just collapse or they progress, and it's not due to the conscious will of any individual or group, or even the majority of people. It just shit happens sometimes. What I do think, where I think you're absolutely right, is that we have a duty now, because we're at such a critical moment with the two singularities coming up. We have a duty to try and make sure that those outcomes are positive, or that the outcomes of those singularities are positive. It may be a doomed enterprise. It may be that there's really not much we can do to nudge them in a good direction. It may be that we'll get a good outcome anyway, whatever we do. But it strikes me that there's a whole range of possible outcomes, some of them good, some of them bad, and we should be trying to figure out how to nudge them in the direction of the good outcomes. Of course, it's always possible you get perverse outcomes, and you're heading towards a good outcome, and unknowingly you nudge it and it goes towards a bad outcome. That could happen. But strikes me as we should be trying to foresee the way that these singularities are going to unfold, and then trying to work out how best to nudge them in a good direction. I think that's a big job.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I agree with you. Yeah, events can occur that will push you in the direction that, there's nothing you can do, or you're going to go off the cliff. I mean, that's part of what I think like YouTube is, for me, and anyway, is about developing resistance, helping people develop personal resistance to overreacting to events. Because one of the problems we have is we're having information overload, and that's causing people to overreact to events that really they should be handled more carefully. We don't all need to bandwagon on like a shooting in a school. We get this information and we don't know how to react to it. We act as if it's a local issue. It's not a local issue. It's a one-off issue, and these issues are going to happen. And we have to get used to how to sort of not overreact. Do you see what I'm saying on that?
Well, yeah, I do. But I'm in England, so to me, when you get a shooting in a school, the answer is obvious. Just don't have legal guns. I'm sorry, but I'm an enormous admirer of America. I love America, but I just think on that one, you guys have just got it wrong. I spent an evening in the back of a New York police cab once. Fascinating evening, years ago, and I tried to have a conversation about gun control with the cops. They just couldn't get it. They couldn't get it. One of them said to the other one, the guy in the back's talking rubbish, but maybe we should restrict the availability of semi-automatic weapons. And the other one looked at him in horror and says, "That's because you don't hunt."
There's an interesting author, Sam Harris, has written a little bit about gun control and the reason. And I'm agnostic when it comes to gun. I could care less about them. To me, it's like I'm not going to make it a huge issue, because yeah, I agree with you. If you could get rid of the guns, you get rid of some of the problems. But there's some interesting statistics that talks about assault. Like you have in the UK, you have more physical assaults than we do in the United States. And part of the reason
that wouldn't surprise me. I think Brits are more violent than Americans. I really do. I think the Brits are a pretty violent bunch, but we don't have guns. So our homicide rate is way lower than yours, because we just haven't got the means to kill each other.
But here's the thing: are you more violent than the United States? Or are you simply reacting to the fact that the chance of someone having a gun is really low. In the United States, if you hit somebody, they may pull out a gun and shoot you. So is that a deterrent it's an interesting question, and I'm not taking sides. I'm just pointing that out as a possible explanation.
Yeah, it's possible. That might be true, but it just strikes, I think, pretty much the rest of the world as obvious that your homicide rate is so high. It's so much higher than anywhere else in the world, and it's because you've got loads of guns. And of course, it's tricky to remove the guns, but you should just stop selling bullets.
Well, Canada has a lot of guns, and they don't have the same homicide rate.
You can't buy a gun anything like as easily in Canada as you can in the States. I'm sure there's a lot of guns across the border, but guns aren't legal in Canada the way they are in the States, are they? But there's a joke that what's the definition of a Canadian? It's an American who doesn't have guns but does have a health policy.
All right, fair enough. Fair enough. Like I said, I am very agnostic when it comes to that. I just don't see that there's any way of winning on that particular avenue of approach. Is a little bit of insanity on our part, but I think it's on the whole, it's probably a minor issue compared to other issues that we could have. Health issue would be a much more interesting one to solve than the gun issue. I mean, at least that's my take. I don't think it changes much to change the gun policy. It doesn't change much. I don't think much depends on it.
I'm a Brit. Gun policy is the business of Americans, and I'm sure you're a very smart culture. You're a very smart people. You'll figure it out sooner or later, I'm sure. And I'm not saying you'll figure it out by agreeing with me. I'm saying you'll figure it out and stop these awful things happening, because they're tragic every time they happen. Having just pissed off most of our audience, probably, I'm going to have to go because I'm required to make dinner.
Okay.
This has been a really interesting conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for joining me. And if you're up to it, maybe sometime I'll send you a link to the book, or when I'm done with it, I'll send you the copy of the short story.
Yeah, please do.
And I'll warn you up front. I made it racy, and there's a foundation of the reason that I did, and I will definitely take your advice on that as well. But I'm going to warn you up front.
That's good. Well, my advice is make it racy as you can. The feedback I've had is that the audience for that sort of book really likes lots of action. They do like the philosophical stuff, but they really like lots of action. They don't like hanging around with descriptions of characters and scenes and so on. They like you to get to lots of action, lots of death, lots of exploding helicopters, and fit the philosophical stuff around that. Okay,
fair enough. All right, well, we'll talk to you again later, I hope. Thanks again for joining me. Okay.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Good to talk to you.